All right, it is Libertarian Overwatch, and today we're going to be covering some of the biggest articles and stories from the revolutions we've been covering so far. So it's kind of crazy to think about it. Back in January, we started with the Bulldozer Revolution. Now we're all the way up to 2009, and that also includes some years where we're having multiple revolutions. In 2005, we had 3 separate ones. In 2009, we have 2 separate ones. I'm still working on the second part of that with Moldova. And that's still to come. But I think before we get any further, one of the things that I wanted to do with this is to kind of cover some of the articles, some of the stories, and where I got some of these sources and why I think they're so important to the full story for some of these. Another thing I want to quickly mention is that we have just started the Flamingo Friday. So we're covering the Albania protests currently going on. And we have a bunch of different articles kind of planned. I've been doing a lot of research on it, trying to figure out what it all means at this time. So I'm very excited to share that with y'all once we get there. So let's take it off. Let's start with Serbia in the year 2000 with the Bulldozer Revolution. So this article comes from Foreign Affairs here. And I mean, it basically lays it out right there in the title, when the CIA interferes in foreign elections. Now, this is actually comes from a part of a book from David Scheimer, but I think this has some of the most important quotes that you will find regarding the Bulldozer Revolution. I think if I had a second choice for this year, I would say the Washington Post article where they talk about the $41 million that was spent in the lead up to the Bulldozer Revolution. But this article, it is paywalled here, so you can't quite see some of the quotes here. But there are 2 quotes in particular that are in this article and in this novel that I think are super important. So one of them is from Douglas Wise, who is a CIA official who was in the Balkans, and he calls Milošević. He says he's a genocidal maniac. And when he's asked whether the U.S. intelligence supported these protests, he said it was a broad spectrum involvement. And then another one is a unnamed senior administration official. And so he said, I can't talk about what we did or didn't do. I'm not going to talk about it. And they may not take their oaths and legal obligations seriously, but I do. So that not real denial, somewhat denial. And I think this article provides some good kind of background on those things, you know. So that one comes from Foreign Affairs. Now, the next one, we're going to travel over to the Philippines in 2001. Now, one of the things that I've really liked doing in my writing is to look at blogs at the time. And, you know, I'm not looking at for facts. We're not looking at blogs and saying what that one person said, that's facts. Instead, what we do here is we're trying to see perspectives and, you know, what's going on the ground. Because in journalistic endeavors, when you're looking at the New York Times, when you're looking at, you know, I know Radio Free Europe is one that is highly available for some of these revolutions and things like that, where there always seems to be new articles and things about that. But I think when you get diaries and things like that, there was one in Belarus that I thought was really important as well. But this is kind of the first example that I had of that, where we had some of the on the ground kind of stories and things like that. So this is a diary of the EDSA movement. And so I think what's really good about this too is we have tons of different photographs here, kind of recapping the events and things like that. One of them I actually shared in my article. Let's see if I can find that here. But it kind of just talks about like how the protests kind of evolved and things like that. This is the photo that I have in my article. So it kind of shows how that SMS kind of text messaging kind of worked along. And it also explains in here some of the jokes that they used against Joseph Estrada and how that Otpor style of humor was really important in the Philippines. Like I said, I think this is a really important diary just because it provides, you know, photos. It provides what local television stations were saying and things like that. And it goes even, as you can see here, like hour by hour, what's going on. And then this photo, which was kind of like a galvanizing event for supporters of Estrada and things like that. So that's going to be the Philippines one. Like I said, I think these diaries just provide some really good details that you're not going to get from your traditional kind of outlets and things like that. You know, I was looking at like the Pinoy Times and things like that. And I do think those also provided, you know, the fuller picture. But I think these diaries and things like that also help add a lot of context, add a lot of color to it. Now, we're going to go to 2002, and this is Madagascar. So this one is going to come from the Center for Nonviolent Conflict Research. I will say before I get too far here, I think that I want to say 2000, 2003, I am proud of that work. There's definitely hours that went into that. But since that time, since Ukraine, and especially now with the 2009 Iran article that I did, that was 11,000 words. In Moldova, we're not finished, but we're near 8,000. We've been really grinding on these articles recently. So I do kind of want to go back and kind of research a little bit more on the Philippines, on Madagascar, and things like that. I think I did get a clear picture of it, a good understanding, but I do think there's more to explore with some of these. But what I do want to point out here is the Center for Nonviolent Conflict Research. This is one that hosts a documentary about the Orange Revolution and things like that. This is another kind of NGO at the time, like a Washington-based NGO. And so they're talking about civil resistance here. And the reason why I highlight this is that it includes Madagascar along with a lot of the other revolutions here. So as you can see here, we start with the outpour, but then we go to 2002. And so citizens of Madagascar organized nonviolently to enforce their presidential election results. So I think that kind of framing is important to point out too, where it says enforce their presidential election results, things like that. But as you can see, it kind of goes on here where we're talking about Lebanon and the Cedar Revolution. We're talking about 2003, the Rose Revolution, Ukraine, the Orange Revolution, Burma, the Saffron Revolution, which, by the way, that was a very fascinating one to learn about. That one is one that I did not have much knowledge about, but now I've learned a lot about monks and about different things like that. But we'll get there once we get to the 2007 articles. So like I said, 2002 Madagascar, I do want to kind of revisit this one and kind of look a little bit more in depth on some of the things going on here. But I think this right here is a good starting point to see how some of the framing is with some of these Washington think tanks and things like that. Now, 2003, the Rose Revolution. This one is going to be from the Open Societies. This is their mapping media for Georgia, I believe it is. And now what I am specifically highlighting here, there is a ton of different things you can see here. But I really want to focus on this channel here, Rustavi 2. Now, Rustavi 2 is the channel that aired the exit polls, which caused a lot of the hubbub, a lot of the commotion in Georgia. And so this is just from the horse's mouth. This is, confirmed from the foundation themselves. And I think is one of the most important connections that can be made here is that, where exactly is it? There we go. I know it's here somewhere. So when we're talking about Rustavi 2, it received significant financial and moral support from international donors such as the Open Society Foundation and the United States government. So that kind of linkage and things like that, I know there are times where people who discuss some of the color revolutions, they try to take something that was said over here and they say, I'm going to take that and that's why this is all a giant plot. I don't like to do that. In fact, when I've been doing some Moldova research earlier today, there are some documentaries that I've been viewing. And for example, some of them are trying to present it as, there were provocateurs from Romania involved in things like that. And particularly they're talking about like this ultra-nationalist group. And that's presented in the documentary that's more so saying like this was all staged, like the violence and stuff that we saw in Moldova. Through further research, we learn, a few years later after the fact that they have done research into that. Intelligence officials are saying, hey, these individuals were not involved in these protests and things like that. So that's a long way of me to say, I like to find it, straight from the horse's mouth. What exactly did these things do? And I don't think it's far of a stretch to say that Rustavi 2, which aired the exit polls, causing some of the chaos in Georgia, and then specifically saying that it had significant financial and moral support from international donors, including the United States government. I think that is something very significant to point out. As you can see down there, I was kind of pointing that out earlier, is that Rustavi 2, in terms of television audience, you can see how much this is compared to some of the other opposition channels and things like that. Some of the newspapers as well, like 24 Hours is one in Georgia that's really important to mention as well. All right, the next one we have is the Ukrainian Weekly. This one I think is really fascinating. So this one, it says in the title, but this is a weekly publication. Now this has been very important too, and I will revisit the Ukrainian Weekly for articles that, or for situations that aren't even in Ukraine. Even Moldova, there was a Ukraine kind of link there, not necessarily between the youth groups or anything like that, but more so with an individual who is Ukrainian, and you'll see once that article comes out what exactly that kind of ties into. Now, what I want to point to in particular here is this part, because this part I have quoted it, I feel like, multiple times, but just the interesting nature of this, that we have Senator John McCain, sending in a statement to the Ukrainian Weekly about their elections and basically saying that, this isn't right. Essentially, let me see if I can. There's a remaining chance for democracy in Ukraine. There we go. So those are some of the quotes and things like that. And he's also the chair of the IRI, saying IRI found problems with the voter lists, things like that. And so, even if we do have these concerns, I just don't know that it's our place to say, hey, your elections are terrible. You need to fix this, especially coming from someone with significant influence and things like that. So I do think that one is very significant. Like I said, I really, really enjoy the Ukrainian Weekly. I think the layout is really good, the way it covers different things. I've used this a lot. Like I said, I will continuously return to this. I'm sure once we get to do the Euromaidan, we're going to be returning to this a whole lot and have a whole lot from here. So that is 2004 Ukraine with the Orange Revolution. The next one, this one is definitely a lot different than the other ones. I covered this a little bit in my Lebanon video, but essentially this is regarding the Abu Adas character, who was essentially initially blamed for the assassination attempt with Rafiq Hariri. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So as you can tell, this is a lengthy document, 2,682 pages long. And I want to say, yes, it looks like this comes from the year 2020. But this, as you can see, it just goes on and on and on about call data, the driver's license. One of them, I think, was, I'm going to see if I can find this. If I can't, I'll just kind of explain what it talks about. It takes a while to search this document as well. But they mentioned about how there was kind of British intelligence was saying something right like days before, kind of like a warning a little bit, right before he was assassinated. So looks like we can't find that right now. But I think this one is another one. Is that here? Is it here? Do you find it? British Institute. No. Okay. Anyways, I think this one is very interesting in that it provided a really good build-up to before he was assassinated and some of the meetings that they were having, in addition just to the actual assassination itself, into Abu Adas, into his family life and things like that. It just really provides this really good background that I think is very important to kind of check out and take note of. So I'm going to try to see real quick if I can find it. If not, we're going to just keep on trucking along. We're going to keep going. It's a long document. All right. The next one comes from the Wall Street Journal. And this one is in Putin's backyard, democracy stirs with U.S. help. Before the Kyrgyzstan election, Western-backed groups offer aid to opposition. So this is in the Wall Street Journal. This one really highlights Mike Stone, who is in charge of Freedom House and their printing press. And I think that quote right there kind of sums it up. We'd print anything that comes through the door. So this has been covered in the USA Conquest of the East documentary, where you can actually see Mike Stone. You can hear him in his words saying, essentially, I want a green revolution, saying like, I want money, essentially. I recently talked about this both in my work for the Libertarian Institute and also just in videos like this, where we talked about even the printing press paper that is used from Freedom House. They're saying the quality of it is like not very good. And that in the documentary, you see them kind of going late at night. And so that way they can kind of print off the opposition paper. So this is one of like the more clear examples that I can see of the United States helping in other countries in their democratic process and things like that. Going in the middle of the night to avoid authorities in Kyrgyzstan as they're printing off opposition papers. It's a wild story. And the Wall Street Journal, it gets to the heart of the matter. But like I said, that documentary really gives fantastic kind of face-to-face kind of interactions with Mike Stone and things like that. So that one I think is very important to highlight. Kyrgyzstan, really, really interesting revolution to kind of learn about. And we'll be returning to it soon because in 2010, it kind of starts all over again. All right, now in 2005, we have WikiLeaks here. And I am glad that Julian Assange has been freed and nothing with Mike Pompeo happened. So let's go here. And now we have Azerbaijan. So in this case, we talk a lot about the youth groups in Azerbaijan. And this is around the time where some of these groups are not kind of coming together to successfully complete some of their revolutions and things like that. Otpor was very successful. Pora was very successful. Khmera was very successful. In this case, we have a lot of different youth groups, and here's one of them right here. So I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. But these WikiLeaks, they really kind of dive into some of the youth groups. I think I actually got the wrong one for this one, but that's okay. It has the same kind of concept where they're actually breaking down the different youth groups and how many people are in these youth groups. These memos that we have kind of showing there were, gosh, off the top of my head, I think 4 to 5 different groups at the time. And so not having that centralized kind of voice and things like that really kind of hurt it. And then there's a lot of internal fighting between the groups and things like that. One of them appeared to be like drunk during a deposition and things like that. So I think when it comes to Azerbaijan, some of the more important tidbits is they actually have like a documentary that they themselves produced. But I think the other important thing is those youth groups and kind of following them and seeing, what kind of, how didn't all gel together, as it were. All right, we're getting there. We're doing good work. All right, this one is really great. Belarus, I think I've said this for a few now, but I really enjoyed the work on Belarus. So this one, as you can tell just by the coloring here, and now this comes from the Internet Archive on March 19th, 2002. As you can see, the color scheme is Otpor all the way. I mean, it is, and you can see it right here. You can see the Otpor fist right there, and I believe it's called Juber. I was doing an interview with the great Kit Klarenberg, and he pronounced it as Juber. And I said, ooh, I have been pronouncing it as Zuber all along. So we'll try to fix that as best we can. But essentially, the youth group here, as you can see, they kind of talk about it. And some of the important things that I want to highlight here is you can see here that Otpor humor. We have the Lukashenko masks that a lot of them are wearing. You can see in some photos where they're being detained by police and things like that with their hands behind their back, and meanwhile have the mask on, which is very interesting and fun to see. And another really important part that I want to highlight here is kind of this paragraph where, they're very direct about it. They say, the experience of the Serbian youth movement, Otpor, has a great influence on their activities, established friendly relationships with the leaders of Otpor, several meetings taking place in Minsk, Belgrade, amongst others, and things like that. So this website in particular is just phenomenal in terms of capturing the full story and things like that. And in fact, by the end, you can see when the group kind of dissolves essentially at the end as you continue on with the Internet Archive. But you also have, like I said, just their events that they're doing. You have kind of just the whole synopsis. They have some opinion pieces on there. They said, right after Saddam fell in 2003, well, he fell, who's next? Essentially, hinting at Lukashenko and Belarus and things like that. So this website, really, really great of presenting the full story. It's right around this time where I started to dive a lot more into the youth groups. And this one, I have this whole blurb, and most of it is just from this website. And I'm not taking the more opinion-based things unless I'm using that as like a framing technique. I'm mostly looking at this and saying, here's exactly what was happening. Here is when they met with these European leaders. Here's when they did, this action, this thing. So very, very important website in my research for Belarus. All right, the next one. This one, I think I could have gone a few different places. This is Russia in 2007. And in a lot of ways, I viewed this one almost as like a culmination of some of the color revolutions and things like that. We had a lot of successful ones kind of leading up to this point. But then with Belarus, we saw that the Jeans Revolution or the Denim Revolution or whatever kind of name you want to give it was unsuccessful. So when it came to Russia in 2007, this is kind of, a lot of the discussions of the color revolutions is in those post-Soviet kind of sphere. Now, you also have Venezuela, for example. So that's kind of outside of that sphere. But Latin America is another one where we're seeing some of these kind of revolutionary type things happening. And so when it comes to Russia, one of the more interesting things is that you actually have two separate groups. You have Nashi and you have Oborona. So this is the Oborona website. And as you can see right there, we have the Otpor logo live and present there. But yeah, Nashi essentially was very well funded, and they had summer camps. They had it through multiple years. You can kind of just see what they were doing in those summer camps. They're playing like the Russian national anthem and things like that. And then eventually Putin actually joins, I believe it's their second year that they're doing the camp, and it started to build and build eventually by, I want to say 2008. So I think right after this kind of attempted revolution, as it were, they really start to fade, and they eventually do dissolve once we get into the 2010s and things like that. But at this time, there's a very heated back and forth between these two groups. When Nashi goes to camp, they actually see the Oburana logo on the pavement as they're going in onto their year at camp. So here I want to point out basically just the big linkage between these ones. Similar to what I talked about with Joubert, one of the things that you're going to see here is kind of talking about their events that they're doing. And there is very, very explicit outpour kind of framing in terms of those humor, nonviolent protest kind of things. And then as you can see it here, this one I think is huge because as we've talked about many times, Gene Sharp's book, From Dictatorship to Democracy, is, I mean, as you can see it here, they call it the Bible of nonviolent resistance and things like that. And, you know, how it led to revolutions in Serbia, Georgia, and Ukraine. And so, as you can see here, Serbia 2000, Georgia 2003, Ukraine 2004. So this gets published in Russia right after those revolutions kind of happened with the support of the defense ministry. And as you can see there, it quickly became a rarity. There are actually some bookshops that had this book that were firebombed, things like that. So it was it was a wild time for sure. And as you can see here, this one, the second one that we have here, is very specific to outpour as well. As you can see, Popovich, he is one of like the leading figures of outpour, along with the other names there as well. And so this one is the nonviolent struggle, 50 crucial points. And as you can see here too, we have the archive where we have all the different actions that they have. So let me just, we'll just click on one here. Let's go to March 2006. So this will show kind of the events that they had at the time and things like that. Now, like I said, some of them are not necessarily super essential. But some of them will talk about, you know, freeing political prisoners. Oleg Kovlovsky is and Ed Gleason, both very important names. Ed actually has a live journal that I referenced a few times in my writing on Russia in 2007. So once again, a very interesting youth group to learn about. And as you can see, having those very specific linkage to outpour as well. All right, the next one we're going to go to is in Burma. Now, this is from the Burma Library. This is the New Light of Myanmar. And so this one is a little bit different from some of the other ones that we were exploring. This one is very explicit, the government framing of events on the ground. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me show you. So there is a multi-part kind of series that is produced in this newspaper, and here we go. We have the very first one here, and it says the Bush policy is worse than the Clinton policy. He declared the policy after the 9/11 attack. The policy is characterized by 3 points. The first is that the U.S. would take preemptive strike against any nation whenever the U.S. security is under threat. Second is that the U.S. will remove the governments of nations which do not conform to American democracy and try to introduce those norms there. And the third point is that the U.S. wanted to carry out the first 2 points alone. It's going to receive support and cooperation from international organizations such as the United Nations and its allies. So this is the journalist here. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. I don't think I would do it very well. But if we are to go down here, I believe it said it was page 8 and page 9. Okay, so these are a very long series, and I can't remember off the top of my head if there's 3 parts or 4 parts. Give me 1 second. Let me get some delicious Wawa coffee. All right. And so essentially in here, I think the biggest thing to point out is exactly that, just the way that this is all kind of framed here. So this is one that I took a screenshot of that and I threw it right in my article because I think this is very important, where it says, for example, the U.S. embassies formed active anti-government organizations such as Otpors in Serbia, Khmera in Georgia, Pora in Ukraine, and that these are formed under U.S. sponsorship, joined hands to overthrow the government through public protest and violence. So this is why I included this one. Do I think what is being said here is 100% accurate? No, not far from it. There is, I don't know if it's this one in particular, but there are some later ones. In fact, actually, it's not from this particular interference series, but it's just in the New Light of Myanmar, where they talk about how the monks, when they went into their monasteries, they found German from the World War II era, if you catch my drift here. They found logos of that in the monasteries, and they found adult videos, and they were also very explicit of like what kind of I'm gonna keep this PG here, what kind of toys they had at the monasteries and things like that. To me, that is very fantastical and not providing any legitimate sources, and is to kind of present the monks in a negative kind of light. So this is definitely not me saying this is 100% accurate, but this is something that I have tried to do recently as well, in addition to including those blogs, is to present, what are different governments and organizations saying at the time. I also do this with Iran in 2009. I don't think everything that press TV is saying is accurate, but this is how it's being framed at the time. This is why trying to have an empire, in terms of the United States, and, foreign intervention, whether it is hostile or through more covert kind of operations, there's a reason why these kind of perceptions do exist and things like that. I don't know if in this one it particularly talks about like the National Democratic Institute, and okay, there we go. So we have like exactly like USAID, IRI, NDI, Freedom House, and things like that. And so, like I said, there's some very specific claims in relation to Burma that just are not credible. There's no secondary kind of backing for some of the stuff that you see in there. So Burma, like I said, another very, very interesting one. I also thought about including that there are some other really, really great sources in things that kind of flesh out the full story. I would highly, highly recommend reading that article. That one took a while to put together, and also took a while to edit, because I had so many different facts that I just had to put them around into a way that actually made sense. It wasn't just a bunch of nonsense gibberish. So highly recommend that article. I'm really patting myself on the back today. All right, so this next one, this is another WikiLeaks one. Now, this is for 2008 in Egypt. And this is a WikiLeaks from Sidney Blumenthal to Hillary Clinton, which, by the way, I saw this video recently. I watched this back in the day, but I kind of forgot about it. If you have not seen it, so Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone his dad is Sidney Blumenthal. And Max was on the Timcast show. And when he's on there, Ian Crossland says, basically right to his face, yeah, Sidney Blumenthal, he kind of sucks. He had no idea that was Max's dad. He was just trashing Sidney Blumenthal right in front of Max's face. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so awkward. But Max took it like a champ and just kept on going on. So fun little tidbit there. But this one essentially is, like I said, an email that is sent to Hillary Clinton, which these WikiLeaks emails are just so essential. If you're familiar with the one that was sent to Hillary Clinton about AQ being on our side in Syria, as just an example of some of the most explosive kind of leaks and things from WikiLeaks. But this one is where Sidney Blumenthal is essentially saying like, hey, some of these revolutionaries, let's maybe like invite them and things like that. And they even describe the April 6th movement, which is also using the Opor logo as well. We keep continuing to see it and things like that. So I want to say maybe down here, but essentially at the end, he's talking about, hey, we should invite them, during a meeting and things like that. I think it's something worth considering. And then as you can see down here, they talk about Opor and things like that, about the book From Dictatorship to Democracy. I don't know if I can see where exactly he sent it to her, but there is a point where he is very explicit in saying that we should invite these individuals. There we go. You might consider inviting them and sending them on a State Department tour about like a mentorship for the Egyptian revolutionaries. So another important part here, and I think that we will be revisiting Egypt very soon, because we haven't even got to the Arab Spring yet. And there you have quite a few revolutions. So I'll be kept busy for sure. And can you believe it? We made it to our last one. All right, so this one is one of the many things from Iran. This one, I kind of wanted to capture the USA Today article rather than this, but this will do just as fine. So they're basically talking about how there is, let's see if I can find the specific numbers. I know it is 20 million. There we go. So they're talking about the grants to Iran, which are going to equal up to about $20 million. Now, important to highlight here is that this is something that was already ongoing, like during the Bush administration. This is not something that Obama himself initiated. But there is a USA Today article talking about it, all of it. Trita Parsi has some quotes in it about the perception of U.S. influence in some of these revolutions and things like that. So just another very important article to kind of highlight, especially from a paper that I don't know what the USA Today is up to nowadays. I don't even know if they still exist, but I know back in my youth, I always found it to be a very interesting and very colorful newspaper. So it's something that I was always interested in, even when I wasn't really interested in the politics or anything like that. Just the sports section I thought was always very interesting in USA Today. So that kind of covers it. And with that, we have covered all of them. We covered all those sources that we talked about. Like I said, there's plenty more to these revolutions. I have so many different sources and things for each thing. I've really been loving books for it. I've really been loving documentaries about it. I think they really just present a good picture, even if they are framed in a certain way. In Russia, we had velvet.ru. Once again, do not believe everything that is said in there, but there are some very specific things that are shown on camera. Unless AI was made in 2007, that is what happened. So that is basically it for now. These research articles have taken hours and hours of time to produce. So if you enjoyed this at all, please feel free to share this with anyone who you think might be interested in this. Continue to follow Substack. Like I said, we're doing the Flamingo Fridays. We're going to continue on with that because I've been having a lot of fun kind of researching that as well. So that's all I got.